We are moving on to Unit 4, which is on cells. Cells are extremely crucial to biology because every living thing is made of cells. And so by understanding cells, we understand the differences between different species and different kinds of organisms. If you're interested in cell biology, there's a lot of careers linked to cell bio. Genetics, which is your study of DNA. Biochemistry is the study of your hormones and what what is balanced between all the molecules in your body. Molecular biology is like looking really deep into a cell and how everything works. And then developmental biology is like learning how fetuses and embryos grow and what kind of similarities and differences there are between different organisms. So a cell is defined as the smallest unit that can carry out life. So the cell itself is a living thing. If you bust a cell open and just look at the parts, its individual parts are not living, but you put them all together and they are a living functional cell. A living thing has to be able to transport materials like waste and things, use energy and somehow obtain it, get rid of their waste, be able to divide and replicate, and respond to the environment. So every individual cell in your body can do that list of things. Now, there are certain organisms like bacteria that are only one cell big, and they can do all those things as well. But in your body, you're multicellular, which means you're made of many, many cells, and each of them is functioning on its own accord and working with the other cells around it, doing that list of activities. Cells were discovered by a guy named Robert Hooke, who was British, and he had taken cork and sliced it very thin and looked under a microscope, which at that time was really just a big magnifying glass. And he saw tiny little squares all lined up in a row. So what he said is they look like prison cells or the cells in a monastery. And so he called them cells. We now know that cork comes from plants, and so he was looking at plant cells. And that's why they're all square. Another guy named Antony van Leeuwenhoek was able to make a very complex microscope, and he is known for his contribution to disease, understanding disease and bacteria, because he took a swab of his mouth and looked at the contents under the microscope, and he found little tiny organisms living in his mouth that we now know are bacteria. Okay, so these two gentlemen really helped us understand what our bodies are made out of. Obviously, all of this depends on the microscope. So here you can see a picture of the earliest microscopes. They use a little mirror to reflect the sunlight and shoot it out the microscope. Now we use a light bulb. But these microscopes could only go about 10 times magnification, which is about the equivalent of just looking through our eyepiece on our microscopes. But Leeuwenhoek's here, the more complex design that you see, could go up to 200 times, which allowed him to see the bacteria and other small organisms. Light microscopes have issues with resolution, meaning it's hard to distinguish one thing from the next. Sometimes that's why we have to close the diaphragm and get rid of some of the light, because it's hard to see where one thing begins and the other ends. So there was, in the 1950s, the electron microscope was invented, and that shot a beam of electrons off of a cell and was able to map the outside of a cell with great detail. And because of that, we know a lot more about cells and get a really, really detailed picture. And that electron beam kind of looks like sonar, so it's getting a very accurate map, including the depth of things, which you can't see in a light microscope. Okay, there were some scientists that were trying to figure out what cells had to do with anything, and so in the 1800s is when a lot of the cell theory came into place. So there were two guys, Schwann and Schleiden, who suggested that cells were the basic unit of all living things, meaning every single living thing on Earth is comprised of cells in some way. And then later, a guy named Virchow first discovered that cells divided. We now know that is called mitosis. And then they also don't spontaneously arise, that they have come from each other. so that the cells that we're made of came from our parents, which came from their parents, and originally we had cells that have been passed down through many, many generations. So all three of these are put together and are known as the cell theory. So the cell theory says all organisms are made of one or more cells. All life functions occur within cells, which we talked about is the reproduction and processing nutrients and removing waste and all that. And then all cells have to come from another cell. This is called cell theory. Remember, a theory has withstood many, many generations of scientists and has stood up to the evidence. Okay, cells need to be pretty small because if a cell gets too big, it's very hard to process nutrients. It just gets really plugged up. So we're talking about surface area and volume. So it needs a large surface area to volume ratio, okay, which means that it's going to have to stay small so that the volume is pretty small compared to the surface area. So if a cell gets too big, sometimes it has to grow an extra nucleus, like some of our white blood cells do, or they may increase their surface area so that they absorb more, like your cells in your intestines have microvilli, which are little tiny folds all over so that it can absorb a lot of stuff. But it needs to remain small because that allows it to reproduce much easier and allows it to move nutrients in and out. For example, if you were to evacuate a city and you had to evacuate New York City and you had to evacuate Brandon, both cities have just a few ways in and out, but because the volume of people is so large in New York City, it would take so long to evacuate. Whereas in Brandon, the volume is not that big, and so it's easy to move people in and out. Okay, so the cell has the same problem. If it's too big, there are too many nutrients inside and too much waste that there's not enough surface area to push it all out and bring it all in. So as it stays small, it's much more efficient. There are some cells that are really big. For example, eggs, like an ostrich egg, is one cell, really. So this is just a very, very big cell, but at the same time it's contained and it's not actually transporting nutrients and all that. It's pretty much a self-sustained cell with all the nutrients it needs to grow that chick. And then once the chick hatched, the rest of that is just waste that gets kind of thrown away. So eggs are one cell that are really, really big. Cells come in a lot of different shapes. Usually when we draw them, they're going to be a perfect circle, but they're not a perfect circle. The shape helps it to do its job. So for example, down here you can see a nerve cell. Here's where the nucleus and all the organelles would be. And then these long dendrites are what helps send the signal from one neuron to the next, which makes us think and move and do all of that. Pollen are different cells that have spikes all over them, allows them to stick to another flower when it's trying to pollinate. Also is what irritates your nose when your pollen gets in your nose. Sperm is another kind of cell. They have a flagella, they have a capsule around it to protect them. So they have all those cell contents in here, but they also have some other features to help them do their job. All cells contain four major parts. They have to have plasma membrane, which is made of phospholipids. And then we already learned about that in unit 2. So that's a fat layer, right? And then cytoplasm is a layer made of water, nutrients, salts, and all the kind of things on the inside. And then ribosomes are an organelle. They're the little blue dots here that make proteins. And then DNA, which is going to be stored in the nucleus. Or if it's in a bacteria cell, it's just going to be floating around in the center. All of these other things in the cell are called organelles, and they're basically the structures that carry out different functions, like making energy, transporting proteins, and things like that. So it's kind of like, it means mini organs. So like in your body, you have organs that help your whole body function. These organelles help a cell function. And all cells can be broken into two types. So you got prokaryotes, which are small and only one cell big. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have anything really fancy about them. So bacteria are prokaryotes. Then you have eukaryotes, which are much larger, and you're going to have a nucleus. Karyo is the root word for nucleus, so prokaryo means before nucleus, which means it was the earliest cells on Earth. And then eukaryote means true nucleus, which means they're the complex nucleus cells. Okay, prokaryotes have some weird features. They have a cell wall to protect them, like bacteria, so they can survive in your body and survive outside of your body. They have DNA that's in a circle. It's a one big circle, and it's all bundled up, and it is just kind of floating in the center. They're super small, so you would need more complex microscopes than we have in our class in order to see them, and they're found everywhere on Earth. In eukaryotic cells, DNA is linear, so there are 46 linear chromosomes in our cells, and they are in the nucleus, and there's other organelles that are complex, that are doing lots of complex processes. They usually make up a multicellular organism like us, so you could be described as a eukaryote because all of your cells have a nucleus. Some eukaryotic cells have cell walls, like in plants and fungi. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. And that is it for section 1.